Back in 2019, Garmin released the GNC 355 navigational unit. It's got a small form factor, it's budget friendly, and it has built-in comms. It's part of their Slimline GPS series, and although it comes in a small form factor and a good price, it doesn't lack in functionality by any means. In this video, I'm going to walk through every setting in detail on how to use the Garmin GNC 355. Let's dive in. So for demonstration purposes throughout this video, I'm going to be using the Garmin GPS app. It's a free app, and it's a great resource for those pilots that are looking to learn more about the GNC 355 or any of the other GPS navigators. The first screen that's going to pop up is going to be the database screen, and this is where you can view the active databases and if they're expired or not. These do indicate that they're expired, but I'm using the demo, so I'm not as worried about it. If your databases are expired, get on the Garmin website and purchase the most up-to-date versions and update your unit. There's a couple of different ways to do it. Please reference your pilot's guide for how to do database updates. You can do it either through an SD card or a Connex subscription. The next screen is going to be the fuel screen. So you want to enter your current fuel on board and fuel flow if it's not already pre-populated and accurate. So I'm going to configure this like we are full fuel in the Dakota that I'm used to flying. So that's 72 gallons of fuel and 14 gallons an hour. There will be a couple of tests that run when you first fire it up. So it'll do a terrain test, and I just got a message here that we're in demo mode, and then you're ready to go. Let's begin by talking about the physical controls on this unit. You will see that we have the home and the power button right here, and this will allow you to access this screen at any time. So say if we're in the terrain screen, we want to go to the menu, just press that button, and here we are. Also, if you want to power down the unit without flipping off your avionics master, just push and hold this button for 3 seconds and it will turn the unit off. So moving on to the lower right-hand knob, you will see that the large diameter portion of the knob, when you turn it, will toggle through the different page shortcuts. I really like this feature. It's a good lean way to switch back and forth between the different pages in the unit without having to hunt through the menus. This is configurable, so if you don't like the default configuration, you can change these settings. I will show you how to do that closer to the end of the video. And it's just a good way to navigate your unit, especially in turbulence. The small diameter portion of this knob will toggle the zoom level if you are on a map screen. So this is going to be on the map, the traffic, and the terrain screen. It will also aid in kind of scrolling down some lists depending on what you have open or selecting a frequency. So it's very dynamic based off of what screen you have active at the moment. So right here, you can see that the page shortcuts box is highlighted, meaning that's what the knob will modify. If you push it, it will open the frequency page, allow you to modify the frequency, or you can push it again to change the comm volume. We will come back to frequency entry here in just a couple of minutes, but I do want to talk about the direct to function first. So if you want to navigate somewhere, basic point-to-point navigation, just hit direct to, and then you can select your waypoint. So say we want to go to Lebanon at KLBO, we can select that waypoint, hit activate, and now we're navigating to Lebanon. You also have the option to activate a specific leg of a flight plan, which we'll cover here in a little bit, or access a list of the nearest waypoints. So this is going to show the 25 airports that are closest to you within a 200 nautical mile radius. So this is really good if you want to get on the ground fast. You can just load a quick navigation to your nearest airport and go. Okay, so now we can come back to comm operation. And there's a couple of ways to select your frequency. The first way is going to be using the knob. So you can push the knob to open the frequency entry screen. Use the large diameter portion of the knob to adjust the hold number, and then use the small diameter portion of the knob to change the number to the right of the decimal point. So once you have your frequency selected, you can push to enter it in the standby, or you can push and hold to toggle it from standby into the active, or you can push and hold to flip-flop it back. Now, my preferred way to enter a frequency is to do it using the touchscreen. If I'm not in turbulence, this is my primary way of doing it. So say we want to go to Springfield Tower 119.9, we can hit enter, and now we've got Springfield Tower loaded up in our standby. Now the last way to enter a frequency is to look it up. So if you go to find, there are several different ways that you can search for frequencies. If you want to go off of the nearest airport, say we want to find Springfield ATIS, we can come here, click ATIS, and it will put it in standby, and then we can just tap on the active to make that standby frequency active once again. Now there are a couple of shortcut buttons here. So if we want to go to 123.0 and load it up right away, we can just hit transfer, and it will go ahead and automatically make that frequency you just typed in active. And then also, if you want to monitor frequencies, like we have Springfield ATIS pulled up, we can hit the monitor button, and it will allow you to listen to both frequencies. So right now we're listening to Bolivar Unicom and ATIS, but we're only transmitting on Bolivar. So this is really handy for if you're flying into a Class Delta, Charlie, or Bravo airport, and you want to get ATIS, but still be talking to center or approach, then this is a really good way to do that. And you can turn that off by just pressing the monitor button once again. Now, lastly, we saw earlier where we could toggle the comm volume using the dial, but if you need to modify that, you can toggle the comm volume using the touchscreen as well, and then modify your squelch right here. All right, so you've seen a little bit of the map, but let's talk about it in a little more detail. Like I talked about earlier, you can zoom the map by turning the smaller diameter portion of the knob, or you can do the traditional way like you would on your smartphone by pinching and dragging. However, on a screen that's small, especially if it's a little choppy, it's not the best way to do it. And then oftentimes you'll end up in the middle of zooming, kicking it off to the side into panning mode. So I prefer to use the knob when I can. So the map is going to show you just basic information as far as where you're navigating to, and then there are different overlays you can turn on, which is accessible in the menu. So there are a lot of different overlays and settings for the traffic menu, and we're going to walk through every one. So get ready. Here we can change the track orientation, so we can change it from north up, track up, or heading up. I prefer to leave it in the default configuration of track up, so I'm always heading in the direction that is up on the map. And then you can change the north up above parameter to change when the map's going to shift to north up. So for example, you can see we're zoomed in and say we're navigating, but then as I zoom out and I reach that 30 nautical mile point, we're going to shift to north up, and then I can view my location relative to the United States and how my brain's used to processing it. So I really like this feature. If I want to zoom out and view it on a big level, I like north up, but if I'm localized, I want track up. But this is completely customizable. If you don't like the feature, you can turn it off, or you can change the range in which it does that adjustment. Now, here with this visual approach button, you can configure when the visual approach field populates in the lower left-hand side of the screen. So you can see right here, we are close. Well, actually, we are at the Bolivar Airport, and the visual approach button is active. So I can click on that to load a visual approach at any time. This is going to currently enable it to show that button when you're within 10 nautical miles of your destination. Now you can configure this based off of whatever distance you want, or you can turn it off. If you have it off, or if you're further than 10 nautical miles away, it's just going to show another user field. Now this is a great transition into user fields, which for some reason I have 4 fields showing fuel flow, which I don't want. So we can come in here and configure these fields. I will just show you how I like this configured. I like to have my TOD counter in the top left. I like to have my ETE or ETA, depending on what you want, in the top right. Fuel flow is a good one, and then I want ground speed here in the lower left-hand corner. But this is just my personal preference. You can see that there are all sorts of different fields that are configurable, so just choose the ones that you want. Now, if you ever get these fields messed up to a point where you want them back to their default configuration, you can restore the fields to their default configuration right here. So if you want to adjust the map detail, if it's a little too busy for your liking, you can dumb that down here. I personally just leave it on full, but you can do what you'd like. Scrolling over here, now we start getting into the overlay option. So the topographical overlay is going to shade the ground based off of its elevation. So you can see southern Missouri is a pretty flat area, but as we zoom out and we get the Rocky Mountains into the picture, you can see that this shading starts to pop in, designating a different altitude. I like it because it just gives a little more detail to the map. However, you can disable it. I'll show you here in a little bit if you just want the blank, black, traditional looking GPS map. The terrain overlay can be activated here, and that's going to shade the ground different colors based off of your relative altitude to it. So if we go back to the map, you can see that as we go west, the elevation is going to increase, and this red's indicating that we have 100 feet or less of clearance from the mountains. It will also shade it yellow based off of your altitude, and see we can adjust it here, and you can see that kind of start to creep over. Now there is a dedicated terrain screen for if you want to get more information on it, but this is just a good overlay to have if you're kind of navigating around some of the mountains. So the traffic overlay is going to allow you to view targets overlaid on the map screen. So I like to have those turned on so I can just see them in the area. And then if I want to view more detail on those targets, I will go to the dedicated traffic screen. We'll talk about traffic in a little more detail here in just a couple of minutes. Now we can move on to enable NEXRAD overlay. And that's going to show a mosaic of precipitation data for either the continental United States or a regional circle around you. So continental United States is going to show a low resolution NEXRAD picture for the entire lower 48. And regional is going to show a higher resolution image, but it's only within a 200 nautical mile radius of the closest ground tower that you are connected to. So for example, if we click on ConUS and then we come out here, we can view that there are some storms down here on the East Coast, but you can tell the picture isn't the highest quality. So I never recommend navigating around storms just using NEXRAD data, but I definitely wouldn't want to on this. But it is a good feature to know, like, hey, I probably don't want to go flying on the East Coast today, or if I am, I definitely want to avoid this area. So it's still usable data. It's just not something that I'm going to be actively navigating around storms with. Now, when you switch that to regional coverage, it's going to put a shaded area around you. So this darker area is going to indicate the regional coverage. And the center of that circle is going to move as you connect to different ground towers. Unfortunately, there's no regional weather here that's available to see what that higher resolution image looks like. But if you look at the image on the screen, this is the example out of the pilot's guide, kind of giving you a gauge of the difference in resolution. You do have a lightning overlay that unfortunately doesn't have any data on the simulator, but it's going to show lightning strikes similar to a storm scope, but it is a little different in the sense that they don't fade with age. So just something to keep in mind. And it's always historical data. So although, again, not something I want to use to navigate around storms, but it's good for identifying what clusters do have electrical activity. And it is going to group similar like clusters of electrical activity versus individual strikes. So you can see what cells are hotter than others per se. Now you can also enable METAR flags on the map. So if we go over here, now on the demo unit, it is for some reason only limited to the PNW, but when you're flying in the current unit, you'll at least get regional coverage. So you'll be able to view these flags for your current area. And the color of these flags indicate the current local weather conditions at the area. So we've got, green, blue, yellow, and I think there's red options as well. You can view the flag scale. I'll throw it up from the pilot's guide. And it just allows you to get a good visual picture of what the weather conditions are, what areas are VFR, what areas are IFR. But if you want to view the detailed METAR information, you can click on a flag here and then hit the METAR button, and it will pull up the current weather observation data. And it's really nice for me because I like the translated data where it's kind of broken down and simplified. But if you want the raw text, you can scroll down to view that. And then if there's a TAF for that area as well, the TAF will also be below the METAR text. So you have access to a bunch of good weather information right there. Now the flags do make it busy, but it is a good way to get a good quick reference on what areas are IFR versus VFR. Over here, the TFR button will enable and disable TFR overlays. So I will zoom in here, and they are designated by these yellow either circles or rectangles sprinkled on the map. Now, from my understanding, the rectangles are more permanent TFRs, so typically like around the White House or power plants or anything like that. And then the yellow circles are going to be temporary TFRs, which are mostly like stadiums and events and stuff like that. So this is good information to have. I don't want to belittle the fact that we have access to it, but I do strongly recommend that you don't use this database solely for TFR avoidance. I would always recommend getting in touch with flight service or talk to ATC along your route to make sure you don't bust any TFRs, because we really don't want to do that. So here we have the access to enable and disable smart airspaces. And that's essentially going to decrease the opacity of airspaces that don't really matter to you. So if you have more than 1,000 foot of separation from an airspace, it's going to make it a little more opaque. So then you can really just focus on what's most pertinent at the time. So airspaces that you're in or on a course to intercept will stay at full opacity, and it will just disable those and kind of dumb down the map. Now, if you don't like that feature, you can turn it off and view all the airspaces in full opacity, but it's just based off of personal preference. Airway overlays can be toggled on and off here, so you can enable or disable high level, low level, or all airways. I'm normally a VFR flyer, so I leave them turned off, but if you frequently fly airways, you can turn that on and view those overlaid on the map. And then lastly, you have the option to overlay obstacles and wires on the map. So if you're within 2,000 feet of an obstacle, they will start popping up on the map, and then you can click on them and view the MSL and AGL figures for each tower in the area. Just a really nice feature to have, and it's kind of nice that it's separate from the terrain overlay, so you can view terrain information without viewing obstacle information if you so choose. If you want to enable the topographical scale, you can do that here. So it's going to put the scale over here on the left-hand side, so you can see kind of the relative elevation for the different shaded options. On this unit, screen real estate is pretty precious, so I normally leave it turned off, but if you want that turned on, there it is. The range ring can be enabled here, so that's that white ring around the aircraft, and it changes as you zoom in or out to kind of just give you a good gauge of where you're at. You can see the edge of the ring here is 15 nautical miles, and it has the different cardinal directions on there, so you can just get a good sense of kind of where you're headed, how far you are away from stuff, just at a quick reference. Now here you can toggle on and off the ahead view function, which is really, really nice on these GPS series navigators. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, and you'll see that it places the own ship directly in the middle of the screen. So you have an equal amount of distance from the front of the aircraft to the rear of the aircraft, and it gives you a good 360-degree picture. However, I will say my airplane doesn't fly backwards very well, so I'm typically only worried about things that are in front of me. So when you toggle on ahead view, it pulls that down to kind of the lower third of the map, so then you can view more information about what's in front of you. So I really like this feature. I think it just makes these GPS series navigators that much more usable. Almost giving you a similar scale to like you're using a GTN 650, which is awesome. So such a great idea, Garmin. So you can adjust your track vector duration here. So that's going to be the blue line that is in front of your own ship in the direction that you're tracking. So the own ship will be tailored like the direction of your heading, and the track vector will be in your track. So it's nice for a couple of things of A, kind of getting a visual picture of how much ground you're going to cover at a designated interval. And B, it allows you to kind of visualize your crab angle and figure out the direction that the wind's coming from. You can adjust the length of that vector here. And then if you get this map so jacked up that you don't know what to do with it, you can always restore it back to the default settings right here. Now moving on, we can talk about the traffic screen. So here we can view more detailed traffic information than just the map overlay. So zooming works the exact same way as the map. So we can use the knob or we can pinch and drag. And if we have a target that we want to get more information on, we can click on them. And here we can view the tail number, aircraft type, closure rate, their track, and ground speed. Now there are two targets kind of close to each other, so we can hit next to toggle between the two of them instead of having to hunt them down on the screen, which is really nice. From the traffic menu, there's a couple of things we can do. We can disable our ADS-B display, which I just leave that on. We can change our vector type. So you can see we had a green vector earlier signifying a relative vector, or we can change it to absolute. So an absolute vector is going to show their ground track exactly as it appears on the map. And that's signified by these white vectors here. An absolute vector is a green vector, which we saw earlier, and that calculates in your current track as well. It gets a little confusing for me, so I prefer to use the absolute vector, but you can select that there. I will say the most accurate vector is going to be a short absolute vector. Now, when I say short, I mean that you can adjust the duration here. So you can go anywhere from a 30-second to a 5-minute vector, but this is just an assumption that they maintain their current heading and ground speed. If any of that changes, now the vector is less accurate. So if you have a long vector and they make a slight change, you'll see it swing all across the map. Just not very usable when it's at 5 minutes, but it's however you want it configured. You can adjust your altitude filter right here. Normal is going to be plus or minus 2,700 feet. Above is going to show people 9,900 feet above you, but 2,700 feet below you. Below is going to show traffic 2,700 feet above you and 9,900 feet below. And unrestricted is going to show all targets at all altitudes. Typically, for a single engine piston aircraft that I fly, I like to leave it on normal. Plus or minus 2,700 feet is pretty good. But if you're flying something fast, flying a jet, or you just like to have all the information at your fingertips, you can fly with unrestricted and view all the targets in the area. The last thing I'll talk about is traffic grouping. So if it has multiple targets that are in close proximity to another, it will show them as one target on the screen, but with an asterisk up there to signify that it's more than one. So it just allows you to make the map a little more usable. It's always going to show the most prominent target. So the one that's displayed is the one that probably offers the most collision probability. So it's just up to personal preference if you would like them grouped or if you want to view every individual target. Okay, so moving on from traffic, we can talk about the dedicated terrain screen. So we saw a little bit of terrain information from the map overlay earlier, but this allows you to get into more detail. So you can see it does the same shading based off of your relative altitude to the ground. And the scale is pretty straightforward. So if it shows up in black, that means you have greater than 1,000 foot of separation from the ground. If it shows up in yellow, then you have between 1,000 and 100 foot of vertical separation. And anything in red signifies less than 100 foot of vertical clearance. Now, obstacles operate on a slightly different scale, in the sense that if they don't show up on the map, you have greater than 2,000 foot of vertical separation. If they show up on the map but they're white, you have between 2,000 and 1,000 foot. If they show up on the map and they're yellow, then you have between 1,000 and 100 feet. And any red obstacles signify less than 100 feet of vertical clearance from that tower or that power line. Now you have a couple of settings here on the terrain screen. Here, you can inhibit the terrain warning system. If you're doing something you shouldn't be and don't want to get warnings, you can do that there. And then you can toggle between an arc or a 360-degree view. So the arc is kind of nice because it does let you view detailed information, more of what's in front of you. You can choose to overlay your flight plan. So if you're actively navigating, it will have that magenta line overlaid on the terrain screen. And then if you want the legend enabled for either terrain or obstacles, you can enable that, and you've got the legend here in the lower left-hand side of the screen. So this is really good where if you're trying to fly between some mountains and some valleys, whatever it may be, you can view really detailed terrain avoidance information here. So moving on to the FSB weather screen, you can see that we have access to a ton more information than we previously had on the map overlays. Now, I'm not going to go through every single overlay in this video just to save some time, but if you want to learn more information and get detailed information about the FSB weather on a GPS series navigator, click the video up here in the top right-hand side of the screen to view my full tutorial there. The nearest screen is really handy because it prioritizes waypoints in a list based off of your current location and your proximity to those waypoints. So like an airport here, it's going to show the top 25 closest airports to you within a 200 nautical mile radius. Clicking on a waypoint will allow you to access the airport information screen, which we'll talk about in a little more detail here in a little bit. But it's just a good way to view all these airports. The same can be done for intersections, VORs, NDBs, user waypoints, and airspace. So there's a ton of information available here. And then you can view center, flight service, and weather frequencies. So center frequencies are nice if you need to pick up flight following and you're not leaving from a towered airport. You can see, looks like Kansas City Center services this area on 127.5. And then the weather frequency page is really nice because say I'm flying VFR, I'm not talking to flight following, and I want to get the current altimeter, I can come here and find the closest automated weather system, find that frequency, tune in, and get the barometer from there. So I use this screen pretty frequently on my cross countries. Now the waypoint information screen is similar, except as opposed to being location-based, you have to search for the waypoint. Now, if we click on airport, it's going to either default to the airport that you're navigating to or the airport that you're at if you don't have a flight plan loaded. So here we can see that it's displaying information for Lebanon. And if we just want to view general information about the airport, we can click here and view, say, the elevation, what fuel's available in the time zone. If we want to view any procedures, we can come here and view all the approaches for this airport and even click on them and load and activate the approach, which is pretty cool. We can preview the runway orientation by clicking here. You can see it outlays the length, surface type, traffic pattern, and then if there's pilot controlled lighting, it allows you to view the frequency here. And you can even click on it and make that frequency on standby, which is pretty cool. Frequencies will allow you to view all the frequencies associated with that waypoint. And then you can preview it, but it's just very similar orientation to the runway preview. If there's any available weather data, it can be accessed here. So this is where you can view METARs, PIREPs, or TAFs for that waypoint via the FSB network. And then any NOTAMs will populate in the NOTAM screen. However, this is not a solely approved source for NOTAMs. So although it will display some good information, specifically about like construction and tower lights being out, you should still talk to flight service to get up-to-date information on all the NOTAMs for that airport. The same can be done for intersections and VORs. I do really like the VOR screen because I can look up a VOR frequency here pretty easily. And then here you can view your list of user waypoints or create a new user waypoint. I'm not going to go into full detail on how to create a user waypoint right now, but if you don't know how and want to learn, click the video on the top right-hand side of the screen where I'll walk you through step by step. Moving on, we can talk about the flight plan screen. So this is where if you're doing something a little more than point-to-point navigation, you'll be getting pretty familiar with the flight planning screen. Now here I'm just going to set up a basic flight plan. So we'll simulate like we're flying from Bolivar to Jefferson City to Lebanon. So I've got my starting waypoint going to Jeff, and then we'll load in Lebanon here. And then we can view that we have these 3 waypoints here. Now, if we want to preview this flight plan and make sure that we have it configured appropriately, we can go to the menu and hit preview, and you can view these appropriate legs where, yep, everything looks good. If you want to store this flight plan for later in the catalog, you can hit store, and then it takes you to the catalog. You can access this catalog by going to the menu. And then from here, you can activate a stored catalog, copy, delete it, whatever you want to do with that. Pressing delete will allow you to delete the current flight plan. If you want to fly a parallel track to a flight plan, so say either you've got multiple aircraft wanting to fly in formation with a little separation, or if you need to offset it to dodge some airspace, you can click that here, choose it, how many miles to the right or to the left you want to fly that parallel track. If you want to invert the flight plan, you can do that here. You can also do it for a catalog flight plan. So say we fly this and we want to fly the exact same route back home, then I can hit invert and it will go from Lebanon to Jeff City to Bolivar. You can also edit the data fields that pop up when creating a flight plan. You can customize any of these by clicking on them here. However, I like the default desired track distance and cumulative distance right here. If we want to activate a specific leg to the flight plan, we can go direct to, go to the flight plan tab. And if we want to go to Jeff City, we can hit Jeff, activate, and now we're flying to Jeff City. Now, when we talk about procedures, you can load either departure or arrival procedures if you're flying into a class Bravo, or any instrument approaches for other airports. Here you can select your waypoint and then specify your approach. So if we want to fly, say, the ILS runway 30, choose our transition, and then we can choose to either load it in the flight plan or load and activate. I'm not going to go into any more detail on procedures just because I'm not an instrument rated pilot, so I'm not up to date with all the ins and outs of procedures and don't want to give out poor information. If you want more information about procedures, either get with your flight instructor or read your pilot's guide. It goes into pretty good depth about the different procedures and how the GPS is going to behave in different scenarios, so I'd highly recommend that. Now, the utility screen houses a bunch of useful utilities that I guess don't deserve a spot on the main menu, but they're ones that I still use quite frequently. So the VCALC utility is super handy, and it essentially allows you to configure the GPS to calculate when you need to begin and end your descent on cross-country flights. So we can select our target altitude here. So if I want to be at the traffic pattern before getting to the airport, I'll say I want to be 1,000 feet above my waypoint, and I want to descend at 500 feet per minute. However, you can configure, if you're flying something a little faster, you can increase your vertical speed profile. That's not a problem. Here you need to adjust your offset. So how many nautical miles from the waypoint do you want to reach your desired altitude? And then now you just need to select your waypoint. So we'll just select Jeff City, which is the one that we're currently navigating to. And you can see that now it pops up to begin the descent in about 24 minutes. And if we wanted to begin it now, we would need to descend at 69 feet per minute to reach our desired altitude by that 3 nautical mile offset. Now, if you remember from our map screen discussion earlier, I had this user field up here with our TOD countdown. So this is nice. So you just always know how far out from descent you are from the main map screen, so you don't have to be switching back and forth. So this way, say a couple minutes ahead of time, I can start richening my mixture up, I can brief my passengers, do whatever I need, and then I'll get that message whenever it's time to descend. I'll descend at my 500 foot per minute rate, I'll get a message when I need to level off, and then I'll do my approach to land. Now I'm not going to walk through and wait 22 minutes for this to come to the TOD, but if you want to see the VCALC utility in action all the way through, click on the video up here on the top right hand side of the screen where I walk you through step by step how to use it. The next utility I want to talk about is the fuel planner. And this can be done a couple of different ways. So this is currently configured like you want to check your fuel in flight, but you need to import your starting and ending waypoint. And you can use this P position button to import your current latitude and longitude, or you can disable it to manually import a starting waypoint. You can change the mode from point to point to flight plan, which I'll run through flight plan here in a second. And then you need to configure your fuel onboard and fuel flow. Now, if you accurately configured this at power up, these figures should be good. Or if you have it connected to an engine monitor, these figures should be good. But if you need to override them, you can click on them and override them right here. Now, the last thing you need is ground speed. So you can either type it in, or you can hit use sensor data if you're in flight to import your current ground speed, and then press compute. From here, it'll calculate the fuel required, fuel remaining, reserve time, endurance, range, and efficiency numbers for that flight. Now, like I said earlier, we can configure this for a flight plan. So let's change the mode to flight plan and then select our plan. So the active will always be at the top if you're flying, or you can view any of the cataloged flight plans down here. So say we'll simulate like we're on the ground and we want to view this flight plan. Then we can select our leg. So we will choose, say, the first leg to Jefferson City, and we will configure it like we're starting with full fuel. Now 14 gallons an hour is good, and say I've estimated that we're going to have a little bit of a tailwind, so we'll be cruising at 135 knots. Now I can hit compute, and it pulls up the same calculations as before, but now we have the previous and next buttons to toggle between the different legs of our flight plan. And then if you want to view the cumulative fuel usage, you can come here to the first leg where it says cumulative, and you can see that the entire flight's going to only need 14.9 gallons. So this is really nice for if you have a long flight plan configured and you need to figure out, okay, when do I need to get fuel? If you have this configured correctly, you'll be able to tell at what waypoint do you need fuel. And then you can view your reserve times to make sure that you maintain the VFR or IFR reserve requirements. The density, altitude, true airspeed, and winds utility is another nice one to have. So we'll start by pressing use sensor data to import just a couple of fields, and then we need to import quite a bit more information. So I'm going to enter arbitrary numbers, but this will all just be information that you gather from other instruments. So we're cruising at 3,500 feet. So let's go ahead and put that in. We'll assume standard pressure. Say our calibrated airspeed is 132. It's 22 degrees C outside. And we'll say our heading is 050. So after that's entered, we can hit compute, and it'll calculate our density altitude, true airspeed, wind direction, wind speed, and then our relative head or tailwind component. So this is really handy for if you need density altitude or true airspeed numbers, or if ATC asks you for a PIREP and you need to give them winds aloft, you can quickly calculate that information here. Now I'm just going to gloss over the rest of these utilities because I don't use them as frequently as the other ones, but you can do a rain prediction here. So if you need to predict rain coverage for a specific instrument approach, you can select your waypoint, date, and time, press compute, and it will tell you if rain is available or not. Here we can view the different clocks and timers that you can set. So this could be good for holds or anything like that. So you can choose the direction, counts up or down, and hit start. And you can see that down here we've got a clock designating the current local time. Scheduled messages can be configured here. So if we want to create one, click create. We can type in our message here. And then we need to select our message type. So a one-time message is going to go off just after a designated period of time. An event is going to go off at a specific time and date. And then a periodic message is going to go off frequently after a designated interval. So this is handy for, say, like a 30-minute reminder to switch tanks for all my low wing guys out there. The last utility is going to be the logs screen. So although this is primarily for your avionics installer, if they want you to export a diagnostic log, you can press this, it'll export it to the SD card, and then you can give it to them. Now the system screen is the last screen that I want to talk about. Although most of this is configured correctly from startup and you shouldn't need to deal with it, there are a couple of functions that I like to change, or at least have the ability to modify if I would like. The first one will be under the setup screen, and that is our nearest runway criteria. So here we can choose like any runway, hard only, hard soft, or water, depending on your aircraft type. And then you can choose a minimum runway length. So if you're flying something with a pretty fast wing on it, you need more space, you can filter out all those short runways that you can't land at. You can also exclude or include user airports by toggling this button. And then the CDI scale can be adjusted here. So if you want it on like a fixed 1 nautical mile scale, you can change it. I prefer to leave it on auto and just let it capture the different scales as you progress through the approach. The page shortcuts option can be configured here. So although the default slot does have to be the map, you can change these other two. So I like having traffic as number 2 and flight plan as number 3, so I can just quickly toggle back and forth between those guys, and then you can restore them to their default fields if you so desire. You can enable and disable airspace alerts for different airspaces here. Prohibited airspace alerts cannot be deactivated, but if you want to, say, deactivate MOA alerts, you can do that there. I leave them all turned on typically. It's just another one of those things. I'd rather have more information than not enough. And then lastly, you can toggle your Connex setup here and access the paired Bluetooth devices. So if you want to link an iPad or an iPhone running ForeFlight or a Garmin Pilot app to this unit to import your ADS-B data and your position data, you can manage those devices here. Okay, so that's it. That's how to use the Garmin GNC 355. I thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll do my best to get back to you. You guys fly safe, and we'll see you in the next video.